And how many of you have tried some of the, well, first of all, let me say thank you for allowing yourselves to be videotaped. That's a wonderful thing. So that's helpful to me and helpful to us, because if we have, when we have opportunities and other people invite us, then we can have a little sample. Okay, this is kind of what it might be like. So we won't be running off trying to make a little bucks in Hollywood or anything like that. So, but what I'd like to do, first of all, is to find out if any of you have attempted using any of the techniques. I talked to one person already today who said that she went back to her school and tried using one of the techniques that was presented. So anybody try? Anybody try? Yes, okay. And what happened with you? And talk nice and loudly for us too, please.
I tried reading the song where you sing it off first and then you take out some words and see if they would focus more, and they did focus more.
Okay.
They were watching where my hands were going when I was silent more than with how we were going. They were really into that.
Okay, excellent. So recalling what people were saying last week about the audition in here, did everybody hear what she said? No? Yes? Okay, all right, great, thank you, thank you. And let's see, where's my girlfriend? Yes, what happened with you?
Yeah, I work with children with 15 months to 24, and you know that they're too loud, and when I try to get their attention, I want to be louder than them. So I think what they say here, I just whispering, and everybody was looking at me, and then I was singing with no words, just like trying to move in my mouth, and everybody was paying attention. And you were doing the emotions.
Okay.
It worked.
Excellent.
And I tried it several times
Okay.
during the week.
Okay, and so trying to sneak that old talking quietly to the kids all of a sudden, it kind of has them looking at you like, what's wrong with you? You know, I mean, it gets their attention. If no other reason, they wonder, how come you're not hollering at me like you normally do? So then they focus, and it was good too that you said you tried it several times,
Yeah.
and it worked every time.
Yes.
So that's a wonderful thing. That's a wonderful thing. Anybody else try anything? No? Okay. Yes.
I did the same thing with the reading of the story.
Mm-hmm.
I read a story and the children were, talking and moving around the rug. So like the last couple pages, I whispered, and it was like, immediately they were just like, what? Like, I can't hear what you're saying. And they did. They kind of leaned in to hear, and they were quiet while I read.
Excellent.
Whispered.
Excellent. Okay. Great. Great. Anybody else? Oh, you had one too?
I tried using a ring stick, but I did try making sure I got my own voice out.
Okay.
But using a ring stick one was a different activity. I know it, and that was like one of the nice popping songs. And that was like, okay, it's time to hang up. We don't go to the next activity. And that worked. And it was really, so I haven't used it for a while.
So you use the brain stick to transition
Yes.
to the next activity.
To let them know the change.
Excellent, excellent. So when we were talking earlier about the sounds that you do like and the sounds that you don't like, and Mars referred to it as the positive sounds and the negative sounds, keeping in mind that we talked about, someone mentioned a child playing blocks together, driving them nuts, and so we talked about what do you do about that? How do you modify that activity so that the child still has the opportunity to claim blocks, but maybe not as long, maybe not as loud, and maybe not right by you. So there are other ways that can be done, but when we're looking at the sounds that different instruments make, to use instruments that are outside of the ordinary. And a rain stick is certainly such an instrument, and it's one of the things, because the rain stick is long, we have to really be careful with its use, because a child can get a hold of that rain stick and knock somebody in the head. Also, some of the rain sticks, the way they're made, the outside skin of it has little pointy things that stick out, and they can be kind of scratchy, and you can be a little bit injured. So you need to be careful, of course, with some of the instruments that we use, but certainly a rain stick has that lovely sound. Has everybody heard a rain stick? Heard the sound of a rain stick? It's got that lovely, peaceful sound, and what have you. So to use that to signal a transition between one activity and the other, it's very good, very good. So.
Make it a paper towel holder,
Mm-hmm.
and just use really thin nails, like super thin,
Yes.
and like super, super tiny little flowers, prices or stone, prices or stone.
Right,
And it's lasted, and I glued it really heavy with like brown paper on it,
yes.
so it lasted a while.
Okay, great. So using the paper towel cylinder for rain sticks, and we use paper towel cylinders for rain sticks too. Sometimes even the rolls that Christmas paper comes on, and that kind of wrapping paper on those long cylinders. If you want a longer one, you know, that can be very nice as well. Anybody else have good experience? Yeah? Anybody thinking about something that you think you might want to try and you just been a little bit shy about it? Yes? Okay. Are you clear on all of the different techniques that were presented? Pretty much? Yes? Okay, great, great, great. Okay, well, what we're going to do now is to review some of the items that we had gone over. At the end, we're going to allow enough time for you to do 2 surveys, actually. And I'm sure that both of them are relatively brief, okay? And but I want to get a sense of, and I want you to have a sense of what you really have a good grasp of so far. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time on basic speech and language development. And I want to get a sense of what you might remember from that. So first I'm going to mention some things, some key ideas, and then I'm going to offer you some examples of a speech or language disorder and have you become diagnosticians, have you figure out which aspect of speech or language is there a problem in. So give it a name, okay? So the main areas that we talked about were articulation, where we were talking about problems with producing what? Yeah, producing the sounds of speech, that's right. And then we were talking about language disorders. So we talked about expressive disorders and also receptive disorders, right? We talked about stuttering, and another word that we often use for stuttering is disfluency. Disfluency. Now, one thing to consider is that the words fluency can be used, go on in, the word fluency can be used in a couple of ways. When we're talking about speech and language development, and we're referring to the term fluency, we're talking about, well, you know, fluent, what's another word for fluent? What's another word you can think of for fluent? Means constant, and what else? Smooth, yes, smooth, nice and smooth. Connected, absolutely. Flowing, yes, absolutely, absolutely. So all of those words refer to fluency. So when we're talking about someone who has a stuttering disorder, that part has been disrupted, hasn't it? Because you have the situation of a person repeating sounds, repeating words, and all that kind of thing, which interferes with how smoothly, how flowingly, okay, how connected those sounds are going to be. But if we use the term fluency in reading, are we talking about the same thing? Are we talking about the same thing? Somebody respond for me, please. Is it in a different way? Can you explain the difference? Can you give us that?
Overall comprehension. Like, can you
Now consider this, you're getting us there. Consider this, when we're talking about comprehension, we're talking about that which we take in and we understand. When we're talking about expression, we're talking about what we put out. So when we talk about fluent reading, comprehension has something to do with it, and we'll talk about that connection. But specifically, the fluency, the reading fluency, has to do with what? How well a child can read. Break it down, how well a child can.
Well, you know, sometimes when a child will read like spot, caught the ball. They'll read spot, caught the ball. And when they want to read fluency, it would be spot, caught the ball.
Right, because it's flowing then, right? It's smooth.
And they don't
It's
break the
connected.
words up.
They don't break the words up, exactly. So there's some similarities, yes, between fluency for stuttering and fluency for reading, but there's also a difference, yes? And so in reading, if a child is a fluent reader, it means he recognizes the words, he knows he can perceive the sounds, he knows how to break down the sounds, he knows how to put those sounds together into units that form words, and then when he gets a whole sentence or a whole phrase, the child can put all of that together and it just comes right on out, right? That's a fluent reader. Now, what you mentioned about the comprehension is that oftentimes, if a child doesn't understand the vocabulary within the language that's being used, it can throw them, it can confuse them, and it can contribute to a bit of disfluent reading. See, so it's all kind of connected, but yet they've got their different spots as well, okay? So that was good. So when we talk, yes,
How many people are with Head Start?
how many people are with Head Start?
Are these teaching strategies goals? Oh, wow. Okay, so you know there's an area in there under literacy, under the literacy objective about understanding and can comprehend smaller and smaller units of speech. So that's part that's true in both the spoken language as well as in reading. Because as you were saying, that there's, smaller units, it's also, can your brain understand each of those small units, but then can you also understand the whole of a word, and then the whole of a sentence, and the whole of a paragraph, and that's how you get to the understanding, the meaning, and the comprehension.
Yeah, so that's how it's all connected. So what you can see is not always a very easy thing to explain, because it is in bits and pieces, and there are different segments and components, but it all kind of fits together. So, okay, so we talked about articulation, we talked about expressive language, receptive language, fluency or stuttering, voice disorders. I don't think we spent much time on voice disorders. Can you give me an example of what you think a voice disorder might sound like, or what that might be? Just give it a try. A voice disorder. Well, what do you think a voice might sound like in order to, if you thought a person might have a voice disorder, what might you hear that might get your attention? And you say, that doesn't sound right. There you go. Good. The scratchiness of a child's voice is one way that could signal a voice disorder. If a child is hoarse, do any of you have children who seem to be hoarse all the time? Any of you? None of you? Okay, how about hoarse a lot of times? Have you ever heard a child being kind of hoarse with rough and scratchy voices? No? Last year? Yeah, okay. Well, one of the things that, now just because you hear a person, whether it's a child or an adult, with a hoarse or raspy voice, doesn't necessarily mean they have a voice disorder. They could have a cold, right? Some of us kind of get like that sometimes. They might also be screamers. Kids who run around screaming and hollering all the time. They are wearing out their vocal folds. You ever heard of the term vocal cords? There's no cords down there. They're actually small folds of tissue that inside of the larynx, some people call it the larynx, is larynx, why it comes before the end. So the vocal folds, what happens is that air comes through this passageway, through the esophagus, and comes up, and by the time it gets into the larynx, or the voice box, as many people refer to it, then the pressure of the air makes those vocal folds beat together. And the intensity, or the force with which that air is coming through, makes those vocal folds vibrate at a certain frequency, or a rate, and that gives rise to pitch. So the faster the rate of the vibration of the vocal folds, the higher the pitch of the voice. And the opposite, of course, is true. So if a person abuses their voices by screaming too much, and this can be a child or an adult, then they can end up having habitual hoarseness or a habitual raspiness. Beyond just not sounding normal, which can become normal if that's what a person sounds like all the time. It can sound good, that's just the way they sound. The problem with simply accepting it and leaving it there is that it can lead to problems. Because if those vocal folds continue to become abused, if they beat together too hard, too often, and too long, then they can develop a tiny little nodule on there. You can have vocal nodules, so it's a tiny little knot on the edge of the vocal folds. Now, if not treated by a speech pathologist or an ear, nose, and throat specialist, that nodule can develop into a polyp, which is a larger growth on there. If not treated, that polyp that is then filled with fluid can rupture, and the toxins can go into the bloodstream. So then you got a medical problem. So listen not only to the articulation of your children and to their language production, listen also to the quality of their voices. Okay. And there was a question or comment.
A person with a speech disorder, could that be the same as a person who has a very high-pitched voice?
Okay, I'm glad you presented it that way. When you say a speech disorder, we're typically talking about an articulation
No,
disorder.
voice disorder.
And that's why I'm breaking it down, because a lot of people say speech disorder and they use that term to refer to everything. Okay, so you would refer to it as a voice disorder. So a person with a very high-pitched voice, and we know that children typically kind of have high-pitched voices, but some of them have really, really high-pitched voices that are unusual for their age and gender. So the gender also factors in, yes? Little boys' voices, especially as they get older, tend to be a little bit lower than little girls' voices. Also a low-pitched voice. I had a little girl once who was about 4 or 5 years old, and she talked way down here. I was like, oh boy, we got something here. So yes, but that is a voice disorder, and it warrants attention. So at that point, you would refer the child for a speech and language evaluation, and then when the speech pathologist evaluates the child, if they think that that child is a good candidate for therapy, then the speech and language pathologist will then refer the child to an ear, nose, and throat specialist to make sure that there's no medical reason why she should not conduct therapy. So that has to be a first stop for us. Before I can actually provide therapy for a child with a voice disorder, I have to refer the child to an ENT to make sure there's no medical disorder.
So okay, there's a singer named Michelle,
Okay.
and she has a very high-pitched voice, like her voice, it like kind of breaks on the nerves, but she sings beautifully. So how does that happen?
How does that happen?
like a squeaking dog. She really do. Like, she like,
She sounds like a squeaking dog.
yeah, she talks like a lady. She said when she was little, not to cut you off, when she was small, she never talked. But when she finally said something when she was like 5, that's what came out. It sounded like a little squeaky little, and she can sing.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay, well, people apparently like the sound.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, so people's bodies are different, our physiology is different, so there's a range of what's normal and what's not, a wide range of what's normal and what's not. If this person is singing with a really, really high-pitched voice, and she's comfortable doing so, and she's not straining to get there, that's where the problem comes in, is that if there's any kind of abuse going on, that may just be the way her physiology happens to be. She can be an exception to the rule, and there are some. But if she's not straining, when she starts straining, that's when the vocal abuse will occur, and that's when her problems could begin. But if she's not straining, and that's just the way, she's made, then she's probably going to be all right. Over time, as she gets older, a lot of our voices drop a little bit. So, hope she makes some good money now. So, because later on, her voice may begin to drop a little bit in volume, in pitch, any of that. So, who knows? Yeah, so that's a good example, though. Thank you. Yes.
So before the call-up, the speech pathologist would do activities, but it wouldn't be medical. Like, you would do therapy, but it wouldn't be medical.
No, actually, if the speech pathologist thinks that there may be either a nodule or a polyp, before she tries anything, she can do the evaluation, which basically consists of listening and providing different activities for the child to produce sounds in different kinds of ways, under different kinds of circumstances. May entail some blowing, some different kind of respiratory activities and things like that as part of the diagnostic process. Also, part of the diagnostic process would be interviewing the parents and the teachers in terms of what they hear and under what circumstances and how often and what time of day. That kind of thing. Does it happen when the child is under fatigue? All those things factor in. So if the speech pathologist, after she's done her evaluation, not therapy, after she's done her evaluation and checked the child out, if she thinks that the child might be a good candidate for therapy, she's not diagnosed at that point whether the child has a polyp or a nodule. She's just knowing that something's not right, and she thinks that it needs attention. So at that point, she needs to refer the child to an ear, nose, and throat specialist in order to make sure that there's nothing medical going on. And if there's something medical going on, then she'll need to proceed in accordance with the prescription of a physician. Interestingly enough, there are some cases, some medical cases, like I worked at St. Margaret's Hospital in Hammond, Indiana some years back, and because there's certain voice disorders that when you listen to them with the trained ear of a speech pathologist, it can help you to discern whether a person has one kind of neurological impairment or another. So the final diagnostic is not the word of the physician, it's the word of the speech and language pathologist. I found that very interesting. But that's the way it is because the doctor is not trained to hear what we're trained to hear. But there can be such fine differences in neurological impairments in terms of what's being presented that it's hard. It's hard for the physicians. It's hard for everybody to figure out, is it this or is it that? It's like people say, well, is it dementia or is it Alzheimer's or, things like that. So we've got similar kinds of disorders. Sometimes it's simply difficult to determine what they are, but in some cases, the quality of the voice can be the telltale factor that can say, they're holding on to the sound longer than what would be usual, so it's probably this. So that's kind of an interesting thing. So with voice disorders, it might be pitched too high, it might be pitched too low. It might be a child who talks really, really loud all the time. And speaking of loudness and softness, there are even elective mutes. You know what an elective mute is? Anybody ever experienced an elective mute? Tell what's an elective mute?
They only speak when they want to speak. So like if you have a child in your classroom who never talks in your classroom, and the parent says, oh, they talk all the time at home. They select when they want to speak and when they don't want to speak. So you may think that the child can't talk or is mute, but they call it selective mutism. Like they only talk around people that they feel very comfortable around, or whenever they just choose to say something.
Yes.
The parents will come in and tell them, oh, say goodbye to your teacher. And they'll say, bye, teacher. And you sit there like, I've never heard this child. So we had a child who did not say anything for 2 years.
Yeah.
She did not say anything. Didn't know what she knew. She would point to things. She would never talk. We would encourage her to talk. She wouldn't say anything. But when she would go home and her mother videoed her, she talked all the time, all night, all day. But when she was at school, she would never say anything.
Thank you. Has anybody ever seen an experience like that before? You have? Yeah. And I've had some elective mutes who did just that. And it was the greatest challenge and the greatest thrill to see these children finally begin to talk. So, but the key, of course, is getting them to a place of comfort. You know, as you say, we've been talking about, this reminds us of something I'm not going to mention to you now, that we said about stuttering. You know, it has to do a lot to do with how comfortable you are in a certain kind of situation. So, but they can be, it's not that they cannot talk, that they don't have the working vocal apparatus. This stuff works. It's the same thing that people think of with deaf people. They used to call deaf people deaf and dumb. Just as it's like if you were deaf and dumb. Well, that's no longer acceptable on 2 levels, because the term dumb technically refers to one who cannot speak, whose vocal folds don't work. They cannot make any sounds. That is not the case with most deaf people. They can make sounds. It's just that many of them cannot produce speech because they have not yet been taught. And I've worked with deaf people where that's what I did. I taught deaf people how to talk. That again is a wonderful, wonderful experience. And so it's not only inaccurate because they can produce, their apparatus is working. They're not mute or dumb, dumb in that sense. They can make sounds. So it's incorrect in that sense, and it's also, at one time, you know how language changes over the years? For example, the word gay. It used to mean just lively and carefree and joyful. Well, it's got a whole different meaning now. And so the same thing happened with a word like dumb. Dumb at one point simply meant that a person could not talk. But then over time it got this stigma attached to it where people figured that a person who was dumb was stupid, that they were not intelligent. And so a deaf person doesn't want to be called deaf and dumb because of both of those reasons. They're not stupid, and they can produce sounds. So if they're deaf, we just call them deaf, or they may be hard of hearing. So, but we should never call them dumb. So let's see: articulation, expressive language, receptive language, stuttering, voice disorders, and communicative pragmatics. Communicative pragmatics, you remember anything about communicative pragmatics? Can you give me an example of communicative pragmatics? We talked about it a tiny bit in the first session 2 weeks ago. How about if a child comes in the morning and you say, good morning, they just problem communicative pragmatics? It is. socially appropriate use of language in any situation. So if a child comes in and you say good morning, it's expected the child say good morning back to you. Or at least say hello or hi or something, but not just walk on past you like you weren't even there. If a child wants to, you're having a conversation, and this one child wants to just take up all the conversation, that's a problem with communicative pragmatics. Children need to learn to take turns in conversation. You say a little bit, and then hold back a little bit, and somebody else say a little bit. And so that's a situation of communicative pragmatics. You can think of the word pragmatics in terms of practical, pragmatics. It's practical for you to be able to take turns when you're talking. Also, in playing games, if a child always wants to be first, or wants to move all the time, have all the turns, that's also a situation of communicative pragmatics. People who don't know how to talk through their problems and who feel like they need to fight, that's another situation of communicative pragmatics. So it has to do with socially appropriate use of language for most situations, okay? Okay, now I'm going to give you an example of something, and you tell me which of these areas that we just reviewed I'm talking about, okay? All right. I'm a child. I am 9 years old, and you hear me saying something like, my brother coming over next week, and I haven't seen him in a long time, because he lived with my dad, and I live with my mom. But I love my brother, and I'm looking forward to him coming back. What did you say? Talk about my brother? Is it articulation? Is it expressive language? Or is it expressive? Articulation, yeah, articulation. Did you notice which sound was, one of the sounds that was not correctly produced? Right, the TH was like a D, right, my brother, right? Okay, good. Okay. So some of those sounds were missed. How about this one? How about, I'm a child, and you notice I said that I'm 11 years old. You know why I said I'm 11 years old? There you go. At 3 years old, was still within the appropriate range of speech. For that, remember when we were talking a couple of weeks ago about articulation, I was saying that there's a wide range of normalcy, but the L's, S's, and R's are among the last sounds to come into a child's repertoire. And if a child has not correctly produced those sounds by the time they're 7, 8 years old, they're still considered within normal range. It doesn't mean that there are children, of course, who can achieve those sounds a lot earlier, but they're still within normal range. But after like 7, 8 years old, they need to be going to therapy. So if I'm 11 and I'm still missing some of those sounds that should be in by then the child needs to be considered for articulation therapy, for speech therapy, for a speech disorder. Okay? How about this? I'll give you a couple more. Oh, and here is, what, do you remember what I said was important about the consonants of our words? Remember that example? Why are consonants important? Why can't we just talk in vowels? What's wrong with that? I like vowels. Remember that example of, yeah, you remember what it was? What did I say? Remember? My mom was going to take me to Chuck E. Cheese. That's right. It's like, oh no. Because we took out all the consonants, yes. So our consonants, maybe you might want to jot this down. Our consonants give our speech intelligibility. Our consonants give our speech intelligibility. Without the consonants, you won't know what a person is talking about. And so one of the problems that we had when we talked about hearing disorders was that most of the hearing disorders occur within high frequency sounds. And those are sounds like sh, and what have you. So with a lot of the consonants are high frequency sounds. So if you have a high frequency hearing loss, there are a lot of consonants that you're not going to hear. And therefore, you won't be able to understand what somebody else is saying. And then if it's time for you to begin to speak, then it'll be difficult for you to know how to produce those sounds because you're having trouble trying to hear them. Okay. So, how about if I am a 4-year-old and I say, my mama is going to let me go to my cousin's house this weekend. Now, is that normal developmental disfluency, or is that secondary disfluency? Is that normal developmental stuttering, or is that secondary stuttering? Is it a problem, or is it not? What you think? Is soft and easy repetitions. Soft and easy repetitions. Once a child got past those initial repetitions, she was okay. My mom was going to take me to my cousin's house. As compared to my mama going to take me to my cousin's house. So what you saw in the second one that you didn't see in the first one was stress and struggle. You don't see that in normal developmental disfluency. Normal developmental disfluency has soft, easy repetitions. Once they get through bouncing on those sounds a few times, and they just keep on moving. But when you see that struggle and eyes blinking and really gripping parts of your mouth or even other body parts, then if you see struggle behavior, that's secondary stuttering. Okay, time to refer that child to a speech pathologist for evaluation. So, any questions about that segment? Because we're going to move on to some other stuff. Any questions about any of that? Okay. Yes.
Just going back to the consonant sounds a little bit.
I'm sorry, your head is in front of you now.
Sorry.
Blocking the sound.
Just going back to the consonant sounds a little bit. I think I've upset my cousin a couple of weeks ago
Okay.
because they have an infant. And he kept saying, my baby say dad. Every time she see me and I come in the room, she say dad, 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 dad. I said, well, I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but she doesn't even realize that you're her dad. She's just playing around with vowel and consonant sounds and learning how to manipulate her tongue and her mouth, and she's just kind of playing with sounds. And he got very upset with me. He told me I didn't know what I was talking about. She was calling him dad. So I know
So
that
now,
early on.
the person who's being called dada is not the father? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's my cousin. It's his baby.
It's his baby.
But he feels like she's saying dada. He says she associates me with being dada. And so, just going back to the speech, I was just telling him that's how she develops the language. I said it's very good she's doing that. She's babbling, she's making sounds, and she's learned how to manipulate her mouth and use her tongue. And so yes, that's what she's doing, but she's not calling me dada.
I'm missing something here. If it's his child, why
It's
does
his,
he have a problem?
she's only 5 months old. Huh? She's 5 months. She doesn't associate him with being dada. At that age, they're just learning how to make sounds. They say mama, mama, dad, 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 dad. So with learning language and learning sounds, shouldn't they start out with making consonant and vowel sound blends like that?
They do. And what's interesting, see, what was surprising me, and it was sounding to me like you were saying, this is a man who has a child and he's upset that the child is calling him dada.
No.
So that's, okay, that's,
It was
Okay.
like she was saying, when I walk in the room, she knows automatically I'm that. She's
Oh, she
saying
calls
that.
you daddy.
No, calls him that.
Oh.
When he walks in, she automatically, that's my dad.
Okay.
She's trying to let him know that she don't recognize that you're my dad. It's just
Okay.
her words.
Right. Okay,
So
okay.
I'm just trying to explain to him how she was just developing speech.
Well, you know, yeah, and you know what's interesting is that it's more often that the moms often get upset because typically a child will say, yeah, the doubt comes first before the mom. And so, but in a lot of cases, in fact, in most cases, probably the mom is usually the one who's around the child more often, and they're like, well, you know, I'm the one that's been up at night changing him diapers and whatnot, and you know, you calling for dad, say mama, say mama. Like, hey, sorry, it ain't gonna happen. Yeah, so it's good. We do bust people's vocals sometimes. Hey, you know, so yeah, he get over it. So, and that's the reason why it's important to have sessions where we can get to talk about what's normal and what's not. Because when we don't know, we get unnecessarily upset about some things, you know? And so having realistic expectations in any situation is a good thing. If you know that if you're expecting to get paid on a certain date, come on now, I know I hit some buttons here. Okay. And if it is explained to you, well, it might be a couple days late. You might have a little rise up in there for a minute, you know, but at least you know they've given you the consideration to let you know that it's going to be a little bit late. That's better than you having made all these financial plans, anticipating getting that check on that day, and then you show up and they say, oh, well, you do. It's like, no, I don't know. So having realistic expectations in any situations is a wonderful thing. Jose, you had a...
Oh, no, that kind of situation happened a lot in the chat.
Uh-huh.
I work with babies.
Right. 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 Yeah. I wanted to just introduce you all for a minute to these gentlemen who came through. They're going to speak a little bit later on. And so one of the sources that I'll be providing to you for information, references that I think would be good for you to consider is a publication that is called Black Child Journal. And have any of you ever heard, do you remember some of you are a lot younger than I, but there's a poem called Hey Black Child that was very popular. Hey Black Child, do you know you can be what you want to be if you try to be what you can be? You remember that? Yeah. Well, that gentleman back there wrote that poem, Mr. Hussein Eugene Perkins. And he is the publisher of the Black Child Journal. And this is a publication that was produced some years ago, and it had a good run and what have you, and then it went into a bit of a hiatus, but it is rising back up like a phoenix. And so he's going to talk to us a little bit later about that rise back up. And then he also has with him his editor, Dr. Michael Edwards. So let's give him a welcome. So now you know who our additional guests are. We got kind of cozy in here with each other. Everybody knew everybody. So I wanted to at least allow you that. Let's see, what do you have? 1:30. What time? 1:30? Okay. I'm going to take you through one more thing, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mars, because after Mars finishes her presentation, well, first of all, Mars has to leave at pretty close to 3 o'clock. And so we want to make sure we get into everything that she would like to share with you today. And we also want you to break into groups so that you can develop one lesson plan, okay, that uses any of the techniques that you've been presented around silence and or sound, okay? You can think about incorporating the use of music or songs. It doesn't have to deal with music at all. It can be as simple as a lesson where you have an activity around teaching poetry, teaching a story, and using the story in different kinds of ways where you're playing around with silence or sound, okay? Because that's what we've got up here, right? Exploring the power of silence and sound. We've been able to see that there is a lot of power there, yes? So what I want to take you through right now is an item where, let's see. Okay, and let's see. Come on, this is our themselves here. You can pass these back. Make sure mine sits on there. And, oh, and if we, there should be a couple of extras I'd like for, Robin Sandy and, Brother Michael to get a copy as well. They there, what's Oh, okay. The room is uncomfortable for you? Okay. Thanks. Okay. I'm going to go over each one of these because I think they're pretty important. And Virginia, can you sit down and do this when you still?
Oh, you can sit.
So accustomed to standing and presenting, I'm real tired. So, sometimes we talk about stories that our children need to know. There are stories that are simply fun to know, yes? And then there are stories that our children need to know. They need to know stories of their own families. They need to know their stories. They need to hear about things that happened when they were little. I tell my daughter, who's now 37, about the time when we were walking down the street and she was 2. And it was a nice warm summer night. And it was a little bit cloudy though, and we looked up and she said, "Mommy." I said, "What, baby?" She said, "There's the moon." I said, "Yep, sure is." And so I said, "It's pretty, isn't it?" She said, "Yeah." And so we went on walking, and then we were talking and chatting and what have you. But then all of a sudden she looked up again and she noticed that she didn't see the moon anymore. And so she said, "Mommy." I said, "What, baby?" She said, "Where did the moon go?" And I looked and it was obscured by the clouds. I said, "Ayana, you know what?" She said, "What?" I said, "Those clouds are playing peekaboo with the moon." And she said, "Peekaboo with the moon." And she just cracked up. She thought that was the funniest thing. She's 2 years old. And so after that time, anytime you saw the moon and it was obscured by clouds, she'd say, "Mommy." And I said, "What, baby?" She said, "The clouds are playing peekaboo with the moon." I said, "Yeah, they sure are." And so in fact, when she was home for Christmas, she lives in Maryland now, and I got her a children's book called Happy Birthday Moon, because the story was about a teddy bear who was out one night going up and down hills and dales trying to keep up with the moon, and it reminded me of that night, that first night when Ayana discovered the moon, and we had that conversation. And those kinds of stories are precious to the children. They need to know that the experiences that we shared with them were precious enough for us to remember them, and then to give them back to them so that they can experience them again. Because it says something about how important they are. how important they are. So let's go over this. Here I'm talking about sounds that our children need to hear. They need to hear loving laughter versus taunting laughter. Like the kind of laughter that happens with bullying. Nah, 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 you so stupid, ha 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 ha. They don't need that. They need to hear loving laughter versus taunting laughter. They need to hear the music of wide varieties that lifts them. That, you know, I like to encourage parents to allow children to hear different kinds of music. There are families that listen to the same music every day, and that's okay. You know, really, it's okay. If that's what parents want to do, is listen to the same music every day, then that's really okay. That's their prerogative. But it's so limiting. It's so limiting. So just at least expose them to different kinds of music, and then as they get older, they can pick and choose what they want. They don't know what to pick and choose from if they're not exposed to anything else. So let them listen to wide varieties of music that soothes them, that challenges them in healthy ways, like when you consider the words and the lyrics in a song. You know, if it encourages them to rise up or something, you know. Songs that allow them the space to see their own visions. This is one of the things that I love about jazz. And just about any instrumentals, but I particularly love jazz, which I had mentioned before that a lot of times when people refer to classical music, they're usually talking about European classical music, but everybody's got their own classical music, and jazz is ours. Jazz is an African American. Now, America just likes to say jazz is the only true American classical music. Jazz is an African American classical music. It was born of the African experience. It's very specifically ours. Other people joined in, started learning it, and that's cool. But, I mean, this was music that was once referred to as jungle music by people who are now trying to claim it as their own. So, jazz, the blues, those are classical styles of music. Salsa, bachata, anything that lasts, that's very popular and lasts for years and years and years, you know, and is valid unto itself, is classical. Music that, and so when you listen to music, sometimes you can see, have you ever just listened to music without words and then you see images in your head? It allows you space to think your own thoughts, to engage your own imaginings. Introduce them to music that introduces them to the wonders and cultures of the world and reminds them of just how beautiful and powerful they are. They need to be exposed to the language of compassion, of encouragement, of friendly bonding, of forgiveness, understanding, and care. They need to be exposed to the sounds of their heartbeats and their inner thoughts. Mars was talking last week about how sometimes you need silence. You need silence just so you can hear yourself think, yes? So allow them to hear that. Expose them to the language of love in its many forms. And I might add, help them along the way to understand what love is and what love isn't. Love is not lust, and love is not obsession. Yeah? Love is not proprietorship. Love is wanting what's best for another person. Yes? Expose them to, allow them to be part of conversations. Have them be part of conversations that include them at meal times. Do you ever have situations where people are sitting down at the dinner table or the breakfast table and all the grown folks are talking and the little ones are sitting there just doing their thing, nobody's talking to them? Pull them into the conversation. There's something that you can say to that little child. There's something you can ask that child, what their opinion is about something. Pull them into the conversation. that's the way they will grow in their development of language skills, is to be around people who have been using it a little bit longer than they have, yes? While walking down the street and otherwise, it allowed them to give voice to their loves. I've seen many situations of mothers walking down the street with their children, and they're on their cell phones. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with parents being on their cell phones when they're walking with their children, but there are situations where every time they have an opportunity to be on that phone, they're on the phone when they're with their child, and that could be a wonderful opportunity to be bonding or talking, having a conversation with the child. If, girl, you know, so, I mean, if it's important, cool. You know, but allowing time for your child, allowing some of that walking down the street time to be, this is just for me and you know. Allow them to, okay, so these conversations allow them to give voice to their dreams, their fears, their preferences, experiences. What would you like to do? You know, we're going away next weekend. Where would you like to go? You know, and just, even if you don't go there, at least allow them to know that their preference makes a difference, that you're interested in knowing what their preference might be. Again, it goes to their sense of self-esteem and their sense of importance in the family. Allow them to hear, to overhear conversations of adults that reflect intelligence, planning, cooperative problem solving, hopes, aspirations, the optimistic expectation of great things to come, a minimum of criticism of them and others, a love and respect for one's own people and others. We know that there are situations within which there are people who, anytime they open their mouths, you know they're going to be complaining about something or they're going to be criticizing somebody. So guess what the children end up doing as they get older? You know, that's what a conversation is supposed to be. Complaining and criticizing, it can be so much richer than that. Allow them to hear that. Allow them to hear that. Allow them to hear sounds that allow their hearts and minds to rest during the day and to be at peace at night. I've been into homes where at the same time they've got the television going, the record player, or the stereo is going, the radio is going, everything's happening at once. And at nighttime, all of that stuff is still on. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm saying that in an environment where there is a constant bombardment of sound, Mara spoke to this last week, even beautiful sounds, like she had the little egg-shaped cabinet that had the, you know, the waterfalls and the birds chirping. Now, it's lovely, but you don't need the birds chirping all day. You know, so you don't need to hear any constant bombardment of sound. Your mind, your central nervous system needs to rest. It needs to rest. Turn that stuff off at night. Let the children rest. Allow them to hear the sounds of welcome. So I mentioned before last week or so, when children come in to your classroom, make sure that they feel welcome by the way you greet them, by the way you look at them, not look past them, but by the way you look at them, and let them know that you're glad that they came. Sounds of sincerity, of clarity, and care in the voices of family members, educators, and others responsible for their well-being. Allow them to hear stories, stories that inspire imaginative and peaceful dreams, stories that help them to understand what power there is in our words, stories that teach them that they come from greatness, that they are greatness, and that they can manifest that greatness in many ways every day even while they're very small. Allow them to hear stories that teach them to love and respect life, to be in awe with the world, and to be the gift that only they can be. And they need to know that. They need to know that there are other people who can do what they can do. Like if they're really, really good at building blocks, or they're really, really good at making gorgeous pictures, it's okay for them to understand that other people can do that too, but nobody else can do it like they can because they're unique. They are gifts to the world like nobody else. Okay? So we're gonna take a break from here. And so let's take maybe about 10 minutes or so. We'll go for 10 minutes or so. And then when we come back, we'll turn it over to Mars. Okay? All right, give your